Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Harnessing Voice of the Customer for Customer-Driven Transformation. My name is Dina Otero, and we'd like to thank you all for joining. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. Our presenters will be happy to answer your questions, so please feel free to submit any questions in the chat window on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Additionally, the recording will be available to the on-demand version within 24 hours. So for those of you who don't know Confirm It, we enable organizations to develop and implement voice of the customer, employee engagement, and market research programs. Confirm It solutions are the most secure, reliable, and scalable in the world and provide technology and expertise that deliver high ROI to leading companies across a variety of industries. Today we are joined by Jeremy Cox and Annette Glinecki. Annette has over a decade's experience in customer experience management and has helped dozens of leading companies build CEM programs that drive change. Annette is a highly respected thought leader and blogs regularly on all aspects of CEM, voice of the customer, and best practices. Jeremy is part of Ovum's customer engagement team, which leads the research and insights into CRM and its potential for spearheading customer-driven business transformation. With over 15 years CRM strategy development and implementation experience on the inside and as a consultant, he is well placed to support enterprises on their next generation customer transformation journey. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Dina, and hello everyone. I don't know about you, but since I got the religion on voice of the customer, which was probably about a dozen years ago, I've often found it strange how much resistance there seems to be within organizations for seeing it as of being able to add real value to the organization. And I think one of the problems has been really a sort of lack of context. So some may see voice of the customer as little more than running the odd survey and perhaps tweaking the performance of a department here and there. But of course it's considerably more than that. So what I'd like to do today is to start off by really sort of giving it a bit of context, and then we can get closer down to the actual voice of the customer and ultimately recommendations. So first thing I'm going to talk about is what I call the customer adaptive imperative. And then I'm going to highlight 8 attributes exhibited by organizations that have that are customer adaptive, and then the value of voice of the customer and how that can really be used to drive transformation within the organization. We've also developed a voice of the customer maturity model at Ovum, so I think when we get to that spot, you might want to consider your own voice of the customer programs and perhaps sort of mentally position yourselves. And then end up with some essential practices for advanced voice of the customer programs and some recommendations. And that's before I hand over to Annette, who will get into the really interesting stuff. So let's get cracking. Okay. So if we think about what's going on in pretty much all industries, all sectors, there's a huge amount of change, very volatile markets. And as this slide here shows, 87% of companies who were on the Fortune 500 list back in 1955 are no longer with us. The life expectancy of firms since then has also reduced from 75 to 15 years. And if you think of the CEO, the number of years that they're in the role is also dropping. So the ability to really transform and change organizations is becoming harder and harder. And if you look at the sages like Jack Welch saying, if change is happening on the outside faster than the inside, the end is in sight. And really this goes back to almost a Darwinian sort of conclusions that it's not the strongest or the most intelligent, but the one that is able to adapt to change. They're the ones that will survive. And lastly, I like this quote from Peter Hassler, the chairman of Swiss Post, saying, if you're not prepared for the future today, then your history tomorrow. So this is the sort of context that we're all in. And if we think of what's going on in the world at the moment, I know this looks very messy, but then let's face it, it is a pretty messy world that we live in. change is happening very rapidly, and it seems to be speeding up. The customer has very much got the power now, and that's been largely enabled by being able to take advantage of mobile and the internet, and also peer-to-peer reviews on social networks, etc. And then in addition to that, we've got the forces of globalization impacting industries. And all of that is creating a more sort of commoditized environment. So the ability to compete and to stay relevant to customers is becoming increasingly hard. And then, of course, things like cloud computing and some of the new technologies around big data, etc., are enabling new business models. So we've only got to think of what's happened when Amazon, the impact that they have had in the retail industry as an example, to see, that there's so much change going on, how it's really difficult for organizations to remain relevant. So that's the kind of background. And of course, customers have more ways of interacting with us than ever before. And in the old way of, different departments developing their own particular processes that interact with customers, those are no longer sufficient to deliver a really good customer experience. So managing the complexity of different channels and orchestrating them and coordinating them is incredibly challenging today. So what are we to do? Well, I think the first thing we need to do is really answer this big question. What must we do to stay relevant to our customers? And I think that is really at the core, at the heart of it. And then once you ask that question, you then can start thinking, okay, so where do we need to be as an organization, and how are we going to fill the gap so that we can stay relevant to our customers? But of course, that's a very difficult thing to do without some kind of navigational aid, some kind of framework. And this is what we've tried to develop. So if we look at the 8 attributes of the customer adaptive enterprise, I think hopefully this will provide a fairly high-level context for considering ultimately voice of the customer and where that fits. So in the course of research over the last couple of years into organizations that seem to have that ability to adapt at the right pace, what we've discovered are 8 common attributes that they have. And it really starts at the top. Visionary leadership that puts the customer right at the center of the organization. Also provides the vision and sense of purpose for the enterprise. A workforce that's fully engaged and supportive of that purpose. The ability to collaborate across the organization, so beyond the silos that so many of us have experienced. Across the organization, but also beyond the organization, with customers, with partners, with suppliers, etc. And then these organizations also have very good sensing capabilities, and this is really where the voice of the customer comes into its own. So they're able to sense, anticipate, and use that knowledge to adapt and respond at the right kind of pace. And as you'd expect, these organizations deliver an excellent customer experience. But as we've also seen, even that is insufficient to keep an organization relevant to customers. And you've only got to think of poor old Nokia and what happened to them when Apple came out with the iPhone, to see that having a good customer experience isn't the end of the story. So we also see the need for continuous innovation. And again, I think this is another area that voice of the customer can add some food for thought, can support. And then we see an enterprise that has connected processes across its value chain, and an enterprise architecture that allows for continuous adaptation and supports that overall vision of the organization. So that's, if you like, at the 70,000-foot level. But that, I think, provides that context for voice of the customer that hopefully will help people see that, potentially it's a lifeline to our future. So what we discovered, though, we did some research last year and discovered that very few organizations really act in that sort of coherent or closely, or that coherent fashion. And very few of them are really closely connected to their customers. And if you look at this diagram, on the left panel with the blue dots, that's the customer adaptive enterprise. So that has all of those 8 attributes pretty well lined up and motoring in the right direction. But if we look at the average performers, which is the vast majority, some 97% fell into this category, the biggest weaknesses were around a lack of insight into what's going on in the customer domain, an inability to therefore sort of develop a superior customer experience, and also an inability to innovate at the right kind of pace. So, one minute they could be relevant to their customers, and the next somebody else comes along, a competitor comes along who in effect takes their business away from them. So what we're saying here is that it's very difficult for organizations to really sort of sense what's going on out there and to respond at the right kind of pace unless they have some kind of pretty well defined and advanced voice of the customer program in place. So this now is where I'm going to start drilling down into the value of voice of the customer for driving this transformation. Further research that we've done, we identified the top priorities of organizations, and this was a very extensive global piece of research, nearly 7,000 organizations across all sectors throughout the world. And what we found was their top priorities, managing compliance, security, and enterprise risk is clearly a sort of a big concern for many organizations. But if you look at these others boxed in red, these are all about exploiting business information to generate insight, building the customer adaptive enterprise, promoting IT-enabled business innovation, transforming service delivery, modernizing the operational platforms, and also succeeding in this new world of mobile and social, this far more sort of connected world. Now, voice of the customer can have an impact on all of those, which is why I believe it to be so critically important for organizations. And an effective voice of the customer program really provides an evidence-based mechanism to underpin that transformation. So not only should it be fueling insights into the customer's particular journey and what experience they're looking for and what their expectations are, and to use that for continuous improvement, but also to harvest ideas that come from customers and use those in the innovation programs of the organization as well. And this is a tough thing for people to do. So voice of the customer programs has fundamentally it's about delivering a better customer experience, but it also offers the opportunity to really sort of prime the innovation pipeline. But at the heart of a good voice of the customer program, as you'd expect, there has to be a customer feedback management capability in place. And I think there are two critical aspects to this. The first one is to provide that rapid reaction capability, that rapid response. So if a customer is dissatisfied in having difficulties, that you can respond rapidly to them and resolve those issues quickly so that they stay as customers. And often, if you respond well, how you respond can help cement those relationships. But also to have good analytics within that process so that you can identify the systemic weaknesses in the customer experience and then use those insights to drive continuous improvement. So really it's about tying the voice of the customer to the customer experience, and so that you have this closed loop going on a continuous basis, so that you're constantly refining and improving the customer experience and actually meeting their rising customer expectations continuously. But voice of the customer isn't just within the customer feedback management arena. There are a whole host of different applications and different points within the organization where there are fragments of the customer, fragments of the voice of the customer. And I've just listed quite a long list here of different types of mechanisms for capturing the voice of the customer. But it also can be in the day-to-day interactions, so having decision engines that feed and capture the fragments of the customer, so that the people in contact with the customer have understand the context of that particular customer's call and can respond accordingly. So there's a whole host of different technologies out there that can provide additional insight into the customer. And of course, with the Internet of Things beginning to take off, that's going to offer even more opportunities to capture those sort of digital footprints of the customer and to really get closer to understanding them and using that for improving the customer experience, but also that continuous innovation. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that we developed this maturity model, and this is a sort of snapshot of it, which shows that what we see in terms of voice of the customer and people's understanding and use of it is at the very limited level, what I've called the tactical. This is often sponsored by the head of a department trying to sort their own particular department out, and often they're using fairly ad hoc approaches which have, frankly, very limited impact on the organization. Then we see other organizations that have what I'm calling a fragmented approach, where people can opt in from different departments and run their own surveys and capture their own sort of feedback from customers. But again, it's very much operating in silos, and the impact across the organization is pretty limited. A more advanced level is what we call holistic, and here what we find is that customer experience is really the number one concern, and trying to improve that. And it's a concern that is right up there at the board level within the organization. And you start to see things like a sort of broad cross-enterprise customer feedback management being in place. Measurements associated with things like Net Promoter Score, etc., and also embedding those within the reward system. So they're trying to impact the internal culture of the organization, as well as the actual experience that customers have. So that's the more advanced. And then the ultimate, if you like, is where you've got all these different mechanisms for capturing the voice of the customer being used, and being used, yes, definitely for improving the customer experience, but also for capturing and harvesting those ideas which will help the firm innovate on a continuous basis as well. So that's a very sort of summarized view. What I'll do is talk now about the essential practices to get to that higher level, if you like. What we have here is a really sort of a simplified diagram that says, the CEO, certainly the leadership of the organization, needs to set the direction, needs to put this, make this a high priority, not an opt-in, an optional thing, but something that is going to impact the whole organization. So it's very much part of that sensing capability that's needed in order to drive relevancy and ensure that organization remains relevant to its customers. But they will also put in place organizational support to to help people take advantage of these insights. So it's not enough just to be able to capture the insights, you've also got to be able to do something with them. So what we see often is a cross-organizational steering group which has representatives from different parts of the organization looking at the problem together and actually coming up with the solutions together to sort of obliterate the silos and actually start to improve or significantly improve the customer experience. But they also tend to focus very much on the cultural aspects. As we all know, people's attitudes to customers have a massive impact on how customers feel about the organization. So making sure that everyone understands the importance of really looking after the customer, and also capturing feedback from employees to find out what are the frustrations, what are the things that are getting in the way of a good customer experience. Perhaps it could be the governance rules within the organization which prevent them to do the right thing by the customer. Maybe those need addressing. So what we see is in these more advanced organizations, they're not just capturing the voice of the customer, but also the voice of the employee and bringing these two together. And they will be using things like customer feedback management, but also a variety of other mechanisms, including sort of real-time intelligence in the course of interactions they have with those customers. And so therefore they're likely to be using a whole variety of different technologies, but they'll be integrated and working together. And what we tend to see is CRM becoming more of a customer hub around which adjacent technologies are embedded, including things like customer feedback management, so that there really is a 360-degree view of the customer, their context, their attitudes to the organization, and also whether or not there are sensitivities that need to be handled when speaking to the customer based on their past experience. So what recommendations do we have? Well, trying to do all this alone is extremely difficult, and so I would strongly recommend working with a partner that can help devise a core customer feedback management program and aim for that level 3, that holistic customer experience focused level of maturity, if you like. So ask yourselves this: do they have experience of working with transformative voice of the customer programs versus just those tactical ones? Do they have any guidance, any best practices, any insights that they've gleaned from their many engagements with clients who are on a transformative program to actually help you take advantage of? Can they help you learn from others' mistakes rather than having to learn the hard way yourselves? Can they capture the voice of the customer through a variety of means? So not just solicited feedback, but also unsolicited. So if we think of the importance of social media at the moment, there's an awful lot of peer-to-peer discussions and comments, etc. So that's the unsolicited feedback that needs to be brought to bear as well. And then finally, do they have great references? Can they point to organizations that have really put the voice of the customer at the heart of their sort of transformation? And if they can say yes to all 4 of those, then I think they're the kind of partner that you should be looking towards. And the other thing I would say is tie the voice of the customer to the customer experience across all channels. And a great place to start is by mapping the customer journeys to really try and understand how different customers or different customer segments, what their journeys might look like. Design the customer experience around that thinking, and then of course get feedback from customers to find out how close you are to meeting their expectations or what needs to change, and then constantly refine the customer experience. So it's that sort of closed loop approach which I think is absolutely essential. And then This is the more detailed picture of those different maturity levels. And I'm not proposing to go through all of this now, but everyone who's participated will get copies of the slides. And if you like, you can have a look at this particular chart and give yourselves scores across these different different areas to see, how advanced your own particular voice of the customer program is, or where do you feel there is a weakness perhaps that needs to be addressed. And this covers a whole host of things, from who's sponsoring it, the objectives, the frequency, the organizational support, listening post alignment, the methods being used, the analytics, voice of the employee, voice of the customer community. So also capturing information from, if you run any customer communities, gathering feedback from those is also an incredibly powerful thing to do too. And then things like the key performance indicators that you may have in place, and to what extent it's supporting the innovation within the organization. And then if you think of the organizational impact, the more advanced the voice of the customer program, the greater the impact's going to be. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Annette.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was a lot of great information. I love that last slide. A lot of great details around where organizations lie within that spectrum of VoC maturity. So that's a great slide for everybody to take a look at. I'm going to do my best to tie my presentation to your concept of customer-driven transformation and talk about doing that by walking in your customer's shoes. I like shoes as much as the next girl, so this should be a pretty easy presentation for me to get through. But all right, so let's go ahead and get started. Advance the slides here. All right. There's the saying, you can't really understand another person's experience until you've walked a mile in their shoes, and this really applies to the customer experience. The customer experience is all about the customer. So if we don't listen to the customers, if we don't think about what the experience is from their perspective, there can be no customer-driven transformation. But what does that mean? What does it mean to walk in our customers' shoes? It means that we really have to know who our customers are, what they're trying to do with our products and services, what they're going through as they're trying to achieve that or trying to use those products and services, and how that experience went. What are the pain points? What are the bright spots? What are the moments, the key moments of truth? So let's get started with that. Let's talk about first things first, and that is, who are our customers? A lot of companies talk about target customers, and who are our target customers, and what can we do for our target customers? How do we advertise? How do we market? How do we sell to our target customers? But what does it really mean, and what can you really do with knowing that your customers or your target customers are males ages 18 to 49? Targets are really too high level and meaningless when it comes to customer experience innovation and design. They don't provide enough detail about needs and goals and attitudes and behaviors, emotions, and they're just too far from reality about what the customer is doing. So what we need to do is really shift from that target thinking to a more actionable definition of the customer, and the way to do that is to develop personas. Personas are up close and personal, a much more detailed view of who your customers are, and that's the place that you really need to start in terms of walking in your customer's shoes. If you really want to develop that personalized experience for your customers, you need to do your homework and develop these personas. And they just take you one step closer to a customer-driven transformation. Personas are fictional characters that are used to describe either your ideal prospect or your actual customer. They're a description of the individual who represents some behavioral segment, some group of people that are trying to do something with your organization, do something with your products, do something with your services. They are real live people, and they're not as high level as as that target thinking. Some best practices around developing personas, and personas is not what I'm going to be talking about here today. I'm going to be talking about customer journey mapping, but if you're going to start mapping the journey, you're going to need to identify whose journey you're going to map. And so a couple of quick best practices on personas. Personas are based on primary research, and they're specific to your business, not to the industry. Obviously, if you're developing or designing your customer experience, you don't really want to know what the personas that were developed for the industry or industry-wide personas. They typically include narratives, images, and other items like that that help a customer understand, help a company understand the needs of the customer. Really, what they do is they add some contextual insight. Personas outline the motivations and the goals and the behaviors and challenges, likes and dislikes, those kinds of things. The interests, the objections, what's happening in your customer's mind, the things that drive their buying decisions or drive whatever it is that they're trying to achieve with your organization. Personas are usually given a human face and a name so that they're easily socialized and communicated throughout the organization so everybody understands who the customer is and can speak customer and speak in the customer's language. And they should be revisited and verified on a regular basis just to make sure that they're still accurate, because as customers' needs evolve, so do your products and vice versa. So definitely good to revisit those on a regular basis. Okay, so once we know who the customer is, whose journey we're going to focus on, we can then take the next step, which is to map their journey with the organization. We need to focus on mapping really specific jobs and that are trying to be achieved, or tasks that they're trying to do with the organization. If you don't do that, you'll find out very quickly that it's going to be difficult and much less meaningless than you would hope. So map at the persona level and don't map at the target audience level or at a very high level like that. Why do we map? If there's going to be any kind of customer-driven transformation, we really need to think about the journey, not just about individual singular touch points. Customers don't think that way, right? They don't think about an organization as a touch point. They think about you as a company, as your brand. And when your product quality stinks, you stink, basically. When your service is bad, you're bad. When it's good, it's all good, right? But you need to take a more holistic view of their experience and tie it all together. And you need to think about the fact that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you need to focus on the entire journey along the way as you're designing the customer experience. So understand your touch points, but think in terms of journeys. A lot of the experience happens between the touch points, and that's difficult for organizations to really measure and to really wrap their heads around. Things that happen between the touch points are those things that include those things that happen behind the scenes, those things that are out of your control, things like what's happening out in the economy and political factors and those kinds of things, or something as simple as if you're going to drive to the store to buy some coffee, right? The traffic and those kinds of things that are outside of a company's control. But you need to take those into account as you're designing the experience. So you really need to think about the entire journey and really understand those things that are happening between the touch points as well. So as you can see in these charts here, McKinsey has done some research on looking at organizations who focus on journeys and not on touch points. And they found that organizations that are able to manage the entire experience, not just managing and focusing on what's happening at those individual touch points, really reap huge rewards. And you can see from these charts here that companies that focus on journeys have enhanced customer satisfaction. They have better ability to reduce churn. They experience increased revenue and greater employee satisfaction as well. They've also, these organizations have also discovered more effective ways to collaborate across functions and levels, and that really helps to drive these types of gains throughout the entire organization. So the value lies in really focusing on the journey, not just on the individual touch points. Again, customers don't think about the organization that way. So there are a lot of different ways that you can map the customer's journey. The approach that I'll talk about is the one that I've adopted. I would not get so lost in the how and really think more about the why. Why do we want to map the customer journey? And it's really about understanding who the customers are and what they're going through, what their experience is, and then ultimately taking what you've mapped here and designing a better customer experience for them. So how do we go through that? What do we do? So again, we start with defining our personas. I've already talked about that. And from there, we take that persona and we map the customer steps. So in order to do that, what we typically do is create some straw man version of the map at first and review it internally with stakeholders to get their input. But the absolute most important thing to do then is to validate it with your customers, to make sure that this is exactly what your customers are experiencing as they're trying to achieve some task with your organization. From there, then we want to identify on-stage people and processes, and the on-stage people and processes are those people and processes and tools that your customer interact with. You can think about it as your front line, but it's not just people. It's the website or the documents or the processes that they have to go through to engage as they're engaging with your organization. You also want to, in your mapping experience or mapping exercise, I should say, consider how people are feeling, what they're thinking at each of those touch points or at each of those points of interaction, and what they're doing. And then always validate, validate, validate. The most important thing you can do as you're mapping is to always validate with your customers. The other thing that you want to do, and this next step is part of how you'll be able to address what's happening between touch points, is also to take a look at what's happening behind the scenes. What are the backstage people and processes that are supporting the experience that the customer is having? So what are those people and processes and tools that feed into what's happening at that touch point and create the experience at that touch point? Then you'll want to assign owners to your touch points. Ownership and accountability are key to action and to transformation at the touch point and throughout the entire journey. So it's important that you have owners assigned at each step so that if you find that there are issues, you know who to go to and who's responsible or who's accountable for that issue. And it's not always all about what bad things. There are great things happening along the way as well. And so if we find out that there's some great things happening at various touch points, we want to make sure that we maintain and maintain those things and also appreciate and recognize those employees who are doing great things at those touch points. Next, we'll want to measure performance, and then from there we'll want to prioritize the moments of truth. And those are areas that are really make or break points for the customer and areas that are really driving the greatest impact on your business outcomes. So those are your key moments of truth. From there, you want to make sure to share the results, which is share the feedback that you've gotten when you measure the performance, and you're going to want to share the maps and the journeys internally so that everyone can understand the impact and the performance and what the customer is going through as they're interacting with your organization. And finally, you want to act on what you've uncovered, innovate, and redesign the customer experience accordingly. Once you've got the process down, there are some rules that actually need to be followed as you map the customer journey. If you really aren't going to achieve that customer-driven transformation without adhering to these rules. Just because you've built the map doesn't mean that you're done, right? It doesn't just stay on the wall or sit on a shelf. It is a living, breathing document. They are multifaceted. First of all, there can be hundreds of maps, right? There's not just one map, just like there is not just one persona that you'll define for your organization. So many jobs to be done, many maps to map those jobs to be done. In order to be really effective, maps also must be created from the customer's perspective and validated by real customers. This is probably the most important rule here, is always make sure that the customers have validated the map and always make sure the maps are from a customer's perspective. Mapping is a collaborative exercise and it's a collaborative tool. Cross-functional involvement is really needed to build the maps and to ensure ownership of the touch points. Everyone sees how their piece, how what they do fits into the puzzle, and how what they do contributes to the customer experience. This is the one rule, this collaboration. This is the one thing that will help organizations to break down silos. Maps have to be communicated. They must be shared. I talked about that earlier as one of the steps of the mapping process. They must be shared and talked about what their findings are. They need to be socialized. They're really the backbone of your customer experience management efforts. Everything that you do must align with the customer and with the customer journey in order to create a better experience. And as I mentioned, they're living, breathing documents. They need to be updated as the experience evolves, as customers evolve, as the organization evolves. They must be updated on a regular basis. And finally, in order to really use maps to transform your customer experience and to transform the thinking within the organization, there are a couple of other things that we need to keep in mind here. One of the most important things is to ensure that the entire organization is on board with this common goal, which is obviously to improve the customer experience. And maps will help to do that. There's sort of that communication piece, that tool that everybody can refer to and say, I see what the customer is going through, and I see where we stand now and what we need to achieve. So customer empathy, that's really the latest buzz phrase, but it's really not just a buzz phrase. It's a reality and it's a necessity. It's all about understanding and sharing the needs and the feelings of others, and to walk in another's shoes is to understand and live what they are doing and thinking and feeling. So those details are all part of the journey mapping process, and when we know this, we can really deliver a great customer experience for the customer, for that individual. Maps are also an important part of employee onboarding and continuous training. And this is really where we start to transform the organizational thinking, is if you can bring those maps into your employee onboarding and then ultimately into their ongoing training as well, we get the employees thinking about how the organization is really focused on the customer from day one of their employment. So it helps the employee connect the dots and make sense of how cross-functional teams work together to deliver experience, and it provides for them a really clear understanding how what they do contributes to the experience and how what they do matters as well. And at the same time, it provides them with a clear line of sight. So when employees have a clear line of sight, that means that they know how they contribute to the customer experience, know what it means to actually deliver a great customer experience, because at some point as you're putting these maps together, you've also taken the steps to define what a great customer experience is going to look like. And that it also means to give them the right tools and training so they're empowered to deliver the customer experience as it should be. And finally, we all know how detrimental silos can be, and as I just mentioned on the previous slide, the maps will help to transform the organizational thinking by breaking down those silos. So when the organization is siloed, information is not shared, and the cross-channel, multi-channel, omni-channel experience is really a mess. It can't happen when the organization is siloed. So the organization as a whole really needs to focus on that end game, and when we break down those silos, it's a much smoother experience for your customers. When we break down silos, what we're doing is we're allowing data and information to flow freely across the organization without any of those barriers. And when those silos exist, customers' end-to-end experience are fragmented and painful. So as you can see, maps are really valuable not only to transform the organization, but your culture as well, the way you do business, and then ultimately the customer experience. So it ties that all together, and the maps are such a powerful tool to ultimately give you that customer-driven transformation that we've been talking about. All right, that is it for me. Dina, I'll turn it over to you, and we can take some questions.
Thank you. Those were some excellent topics, and we definitely have a lot of questions coming in. Annette, actually, since we were just talking about this, can you talk about some best practices for validating journey maps with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of different ways to do that. I just went through an exercise with a client in the last couple of weeks where we had built their journey map. We had taken it down again to we started at the persona level, and we went even one step further and took it down to an individual customer level. We had the name of the customer and we talked about that customer. And what the client did then was actually go and contact that customer and show the map to them and have them walk through the steps that they took for that particular interaction. And that's one way that you can validate the map. The maps can be validated in a couple different ways. So you can go to that level. You can take them out to, if you've got a customer advisory board and you've got people that on that board who have obviously agreed to help to improve the customer experience and go through customer experience design with you, you can take that map, those maps out to your customer advisory board and have them weigh in on it. You can do focus groups. You can post it online and have, invite select customers to go in and take a look at the maps and confirm what they've done. Confirm what you've done, I should say, is exactly what they would go through as they experience that interaction. So those are just a couple of ways that you can validate the map.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, you mentioned Net Promoter Scores as a way to measure. Are there any other analytics that you would recommend?
I think there's a whole host of analytics. I mean, Net Promoter Score is a common one. Customer satisfaction scores. One that I've seen quite a bit of recently, especially in the telecoms arena, is customer effort scores. So what they discovered, I was talking to, I think it was BT Retail, and they found that whilst NPS was a good indicator of customer satisfaction and potential loyalty, shall we say, they found that the customer effort, or the amount of effort required by the customer, was an even bigger indicator of whether or not they were likely to stay or go. So I think that's an interesting one. I'm not sure whether it's just for commodity environments like the telecoms environment, but certainly it's an interesting one. I think other scores are actually feedback from employees. So there's a whole host of stuff around to what extent the employee is engaged with the overall purpose of the organisation. I think that's another area that can be looked at, or the morale, if you like, of employees. So there are quite a few, and there I'm sure that you can throw a few more at the question.
Yeah, that is a fair question to ask. I will pass on it at this point, though, Jeremy.
Oh, right. Can I answer another question that I saw pop up, which I thought was made me chuckle, and it's from Jace Clark, who said, to quote from Spider-Man, "With great power there must also come great responsibility. If customers have the power, where does the responsibility lie?" Well, how I would answer that is to say I think Spider-Man was wrong. I think, sadly, although the customer has the power, it's the organisation's responsibility to somehow meet the expectations of the customer. So maybe it's slightly asymmetrical.
I'll add to that one, Jeremy. I would, from a customer's perspective, I think in terms of their responsibility, is to provide. I mean, here we are. This is the business we're in, right? I would say that they need to provide feedback, right? If companies aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, if they're not meeting their expectation, if their performance is not up to snuff with customers, I think the customer's responsibility lies in letting the company know. And I know that that's not a problem these days, right? They're certainly out there. They have so many ways to provide feedback and so many different listening posts with social media and then some. So I don't think that's a problem. But I would say that that's where the customer's responsibility lies in letting companies know how they're doing.
Great. So this one actually I think can go to both of you as well. What is the best way to get the attention at the board level for an enterprise-wide VoC program?
That's a great question, and it's one that I've had some experience of as well. I think when a board is of a mindset that voice of the customer is something that's done down there in that department, it's a real struggle to actually sort of change their mind. So I think setting it in a broader context, and that's why I recently did a presentation to a board of a large services organisation in the UK, and it was the CEO who I discussed it with in advance. And what I did was I talked around the customer adaptive attributes and pointed out and made it very, very obvious that the sensing capabilities were pretty critical to that organisation maintaining its relevance, and that unless they had good sensing capabilities, they were going to they were at risk of losing customers. And therefore, they had to take voice of the customer more seriously. And as a result of that conversation, they sort of bought into the idea, and they're now, instead of doing the odd sort of survey once a year, the "Do you love us? Do you hate us?" kind of thing, it's far more continuous now. So they've really started to embed that within the organisation. So I think that's perhaps the way to meet that challenge is to raise their sights and get them thinking about voice of the customer as a critical feedback mechanism for keeping their eye on the ball that matters, which is the customer.
I'll weigh in on that one as well and just say that I'll pull a couple of things from a presentation that I did a couple months ago, which was based on executive level support. But I think the board, is getting their support is not all that much different from executive level support. And I think a couple of quick things, to win their hearts and minds is to really build the business case. Getting those quick wins, showing proof of concept, and showing what the impact can be on the organization and what some of those desirable business outcomes are. Another one is really just showing them some hard data. I mean, Jeremy, you showed some statistics on your first slide, right? And to back those statistics up with what caused the organizations to die, basically, So, there's a lot of hard data out there on the impact of focusing on the customer experience and listening to customers. And I think if we bring some of that to the table, I think that's a key thing as well. Those are sort of the speaking of hearts and minds, those are sort of the things to win over their minds, but we also want to win over their hearts, and the flip side of that is to share customer stories, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. We could get into some detail on that, but really sharing the customer journey map, there's another way, really putting it out to them to say, here's what our customers go through, how much longer are we going to be around, or how much longer are they going to be around if we continue to deliver this kind of experience. So those are just a couple of ideas off the top of my head.
Just one other thing to add to that is I've seen it on a couple of occasions where actually dragging the board members out to meet customers face to face can be quite an eye-opener for them.
Absolutely. Sorry, Dean.
Annette, that was actually, no, that's okay. That was a good segue to the next question. Do you actually have any suggestions on how to document or visually represent a customer journey?
You know what? There are, and I meant to put some examples in my slide deck, and I didn't do that because there are so many different ways to do it. Right? There are software tools out there that you can use to do it. This recent client that I just mentioned earlier, we built it on a wall on a long brown sheet of paper with Post-its and everything, and then I took it from there and transferred it into Excel. Some people use Visio. There are a lot of different ways that you could display. If there's a specific person who had that question that wants us to send some examples, I can certainly do that. Absolutely.
Great. So we are actually running out of time, and we'd like to be sensitive with everyone's schedules. But any questions that have not been answered yet, because we do have a lot coming in, which is very exciting, we will follow up with you after the webinar. We do have everyone's email address. But Jeremy and Nanette, thank you so much for joining today. I think these were excellent topics, and clearly everyone was very interested. As a reminder, the recording and the slides will be available in the next 24 hours, and we'll be sending it out to everyone that attended today. Again, Jeremy and Nanette, thank you, and we hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.